There are towns in Louisiana that never found their way back onto the map after the storms. Places where the swamp swallowed the train lines, and the river, too stubborn to stay in its bed, carved new paths through streets that once had names. Baylock was one of them. In the winter of 1949, the town was little more than a cluster of leaning houses, a silent main road that led nowhere, and an abandoned hotel whose upper windows glimmered faintly at night, as if catching light from a world no longer here. Locals called it the Meridian House, though no one remembered why. Some said it had once been a stopover for traveling salesmen and oilmen moving between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Others claimed it had been a sanatorium before the war. Either way, it stood empty, its walls gray and blistered, its porch sagging toward the overgrown street. When the man arrived, he did not plan to stay long. His name was Thomas Vale, and his car, a 1938 Hudson Terraplane, coughed its way through the final mile of gravel road before stopping in front of the building. He had driven through the night from Galveston, a suitcase beside him, the photograph of his wife turned face down on the dashboard. 3 months earlier, she had drowned, during a summer flood. He had been there, waist-deep in the current, watching her body disappear between the branches that snapped like bones in the rushing water. The search had lasted a week. They found nothing. Since then, he had slept in strange towns, always near rivers, always in rooms with windows that faced the water. Something in him could not stop returning to the sound of it, the endless pull of what it takes and never gives back. The Meridian House was not open to guests, yet there it was, light in the lobby, faint but unmistakable. When he pushed open the door, the hinges sighed and released a draft that smelled of rot and cold iron. The front desk stood under a chandelier whose glass hung in an uneven strands like broken teeth. Behind it, ledgers lay swollen with moisture, their pages warped into unreadable waves. And on the far wall, a large gilt mirror reflected the empty room, except that the reflection was not empty. In the glass, the chandelier's missing pieces were whole again. The wallpaper, stripped by decades, appeared unblemished. There was even a faint trace of motion behind the counter, as though someone had just stepped away. Thomas blinked. The vision held for a moment longer, then faded back to dust and ruin. He took a key from the board, room 217, and climbed the staircase that trembled under his weight. The hall above was lined with mirrors, tall and tarnished, their edges eaten by corrosion. Each one caught a sliver of his passing shape, but none followed correctly. His reflection lagged by a heartbeat, like film played a fraction too slow. Room 217 was at the end of the corridor. The key turned easily. Inside, everything was covered in a thin film of gray. A single bed, a dresser, a window nailed shut, and opposite the bed, a full-length mirror, its surface veiled in a layer of dust thick enough to dull the light. He wiped it with the sleeve of his coat. And there, behind his own figure, the room was whole again, bright, lived in. The wallpaper had color, the curtains stirred with wind, though the real air was still. And on the dresser, in that other version, stood a vase of white camellias, the kind his wife used to place in the window each morning. He did not move. The sound that filled the air was faint, but certain, a record player somewhere far below, the melody warped but recognizable. "I'll Be Seeing You," the same song they had danced to the night before the storm. Thomas sat on the bed until the record ended. The mirror, when he looked again, had dimmed. Only his own tired face stared back. He told himself it was exhaustion, that the mind, starved of sleep, sees what it wants to. But he left the lamp burning through the night, and though the air was heavy with dust, he dreamed of rain. At dawn, the fog had crept up from the river, pressing against the windows like breath on glass. Thomas dressed and walked the hall. The hotel was utterly still, yet it felt inhabited, as though each room held its own muted life, just out of sync with his. He reached the lobby and found on the counter an open guest book. The entries were blurred, ink bleeding through the paper, but one name was legible near the top. Eleanor Vale, June 12, 1949. He stared at it for a long time. His wife's name. The date, 2 weeks after the flood. He closed the book, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the slow realization that the world had tilted in some small, irreversible way. Outside, the fog swallowed the street entirely. The car was nothing but a gray shape under the veil. He stepped back inside, drawn once more toward the mirror behind the desk. The reflection had changed again. The lobby was bathed in sunlight, the chandelier gleaming whole, and the door stood open onto a bright afternoon. Through it, figures moved along the street, their faces indistinct, their shadows long. In the reflection, the hotel was alive. And then, barely visible, someone stood where he was, in the mirrored version, looking directly out. A woman in a light dress, her hair pinned back, her hand resting on the desk. He knew the outline, even before the thought formed. When he blinked, she was gone. He told himself he would leave, that afternoon, but he did not. Instead, he opened each room along the corridor, one by one, as though searching for evidence that the building still obeyed the logic of the living. The first few rooms were the same: dust, silence, the odor of neglect. But in room 203, the bed was made, sheets tight, pillow fluffed, an old Bible lying open on the nightstand. Its pages were unstained by time. On the last page, written faintly in pencil, "The mirror shows what was lost." He backed away, his reflection stuttering in the hallway glass. Behind him, in that other world, a faint outline lingered, someone standing in room 217, facing the door. The air felt colder, pressing in like deep water. He returned to his own room before dark. The mirror waited. When the lamplight flickered against its surface, he saw her again. Not clear, not fully formed, but there, seated on the bed's edge. The camellias gleamed white. The wind in that other world stirred the curtains as before. And though no sound carried through, he could almost sense her lips moving, slowly, rhythmically, as if repeating a single phrase over and over. He stayed there for hours, unmoving, until the reflection darkened and swallowed itself in shadow. Only then did he realize that the night had deepened beyond all reason, and that the clock on the wall had stopped. The air no longer smelt of dust, but of river water. By morning, the fog had retreated. The hotel looked smaller, frailer, as though it had aged years overnight. Thomas packed his bag, but his hands were unsteady, his thoughts slipping like wet glass. At the doorway, he looked once more toward the mirror behind the counter. In the reflection, the keyboard was full, every room occupied. He watched as one hook emptied itself, a key vanishing into thin air. When he stepped outside, the sound of the river was louder than before. The current carried a low murmur, like a distant voice calling from beneath the surface. He drove away slowly, but after half a mile he stopped. In the rearview mirror, the hotel still stood. Yet in its upper window, light moved again, as if someone were drawing back a curtain. He turned the mirror upward. It showed nothing but sky. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he had been seen, that something within the glass had turned to watch him leave.
For 3 days, the weather held still. The air above Baylock became heavy and unmoving, the sky hanging low with clouds that refused to break. The river's surface looked like metal, dull and waiting. And the Meridian House, though it seemed abandoned from the street, carried a faint pulse within, a whisper of something breathing through its walls. Thomas Vale did not leave. He told himself he was studying the place, trying to understand its strange persistence, but that was not the truth. What held him there was not curiosity, but the echo of something tender and unbearable. The shape of her face in the mirror, the impossible suggestion that she was still somewhere near. Each evening, as dusk bled into night, the reflections grew clearer. It began with small things: a chair straightened, curtains shifting, the vase of camellias always fresh and white. Then came motion, the slight turn of a head, the faint movement of a hand. The woman in the glass seemed aware of him, though she never met his eyes directly. It was as if she existed half a second behind his world, repeating her gestures in quiet sympathy. The second night, he placed his palm against the mirror. The glass was cold at first, but as he held it there, a warmth bloomed from the other side. For one suspended moment, he could almost feel the outline of another hand pressing back. When he drew away, a perfect print remained, 5 faint marks, as if made from inside the glass. He did not sleep after that. The hotel began to shift. Corridors that had been straight now curved subtly, leading him to unfamiliar doors. The numbering on the rooms changed, digits slipping from one plate to another. At times, he would walk the entire length of the second floor, only to find himself once again before room 217. He started leaving notes to track the changes, but the next morning the paper was gone, replaced by words scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. Keep looking. He told himself it was a trick of moisture, a bleed of ink, a hallucination born from fatigue. Yet every explanation he reached dissolved as soon as he looked back at the mirror. There, the world made its own cruel kind of sense. In the reflection, the hotel was vibrant. Lamps glowed with warm yellow light. The walls shone with varnish. He saw people passing in the corridor, faint outlines, guests in coats and dresses from decades past. Sometimes they would pause as though listening for something, then fade back into the brightness beyond. And in the center of it all was the woman. She sat most often at the foot of the bed in room 217, sometimes reading, sometimes turning her head toward him with the smallest of smiles. The light caught her hair exactly as he remembered, the soft gold near her temples, the way it framed her face when she laughed. He could not remember the sound of her voice anymore, but the sight of her lips moving filled him with a kind of reverent dread. It was not grief now, it was hunger. By the 4th night, Thomas stopped trying to tell the difference between reflection and memory. When he looked into the glass, he saw scenes that were not his, a wedding he didn't attend, a room he didn't know. The mirror seemed to be dredging something deeper, older, pulling him into the sediment of time. The walls began to hum with a low vibration, like the far-off rumble of a train through water. He would wake at night to find the lamp flickering, the room colder than before. And always there was that faint scent of camellias, clean, sweet, and wrong. The smell of something living in a place that should not live. One morning he found a folded newspaper under the door, the Baton Rouge Chronicle, dated June 18, 1949. The headline read, "Flood claims 12, woman still missing from Baylock." Her name was there again, Eleanor Vale, his wife. Below, a small photograph, the same one he kept in his wallet, only the edges were cleaner, the print too new. He checked the hallway. No footprints, no draft, only silence. The paper itself was dry, the ink unfaded, as though it had been printed that very morning. He turned to the mirror, half expecting to see her standing there. Instead, the reflection showed himself,
but not as he was. This version of him looked rested, younger, the faint shadow of a smile on his lips. Behind that other Thomas, the woman's hand rested on his shoulder, her face near him. They looked alive. He reached for the glass again. It rippled beneath his touch, soft as water. For the first time, the world inside moved before he did. The other Thomas turned his head, looked directly out, and smiled. The next hours dissolved into one continuous blur of half-light and silence. He wandered through the corridors, every step echoing like footsteps behind him. The mirrors along the hall now carried full scenes. A maid arranging flowers, a man reading in the lobby, a child running past the stairwell. Every mirror was alive, whispering its separate world. At the far end of the hall, room 217's door stood open. Inside, the reflection burned with light. He took a single step forward, then another. The floorboards creaked like sighs beneath his feet. When he crossed the threshold, the hum stopped. Silence filled the world. In the mirror across from the bed, his reflection stood waiting. Behind it, the woman smiled and extended her hand. The storm did not stop for 2 days. By the morning of the 3rd, Baylock was a drowned city, its streets thick with brown water, the air humming with the echo of thunder rolling upriver. The few residents who remained kept their windows shuttered, listening to the wind moan through the oaks like a human voice. The Meridian House, half submerged at its foundation, seemed to lean toward the water. Its reflection shimmered in the flood like a painting seen through smoke, beautiful but fragile, moments away from dissolving. Inside room 217, Thomas Vale did not notice the storm at all. He had stopped sleeping. His beard had grown in uneven patches, his eyes hollowed by the lamplight that burned endlessly beside the mirror. He had pulled the chair closer still, so that his knees touched the dresser, his face only inches from the glass. The world beyond the mirror had changed again. It was no longer bright. The light there was dust-colored, copper and red, as if it had been frozen at the edge of sunset. Dust hung motionless in the air. The other Thomas, his reflection, his twin, his ghost, no longer smiled. He simply stood there beside the woman, unmoving, his eyes fixed on something unseen. At times the glass trembled faintly, as if straining to hold back the weight of what waited beyond it. Thomas could hear it now, faint, rhythmic, like breathing. The sound did not come from the room, but from inside the reflection. He pressed his hand against the glass again. It was no longer cold. That evening, he found the river inside the mirror. It ran along the street where there should have been dry cobblestone, smooth, gleaming, silent. The reflection of the sky above it was black, the surface disturbed by shapes just beneath, as if something alive was moving there. The hotel's mirrored windows glowed faintly red, pulsing with the same rhythm as the sound in the glass. He turned toward the bed and froze. Someone had written words on the wall, directly above the headboard, traced in a thin film of condensation. "You're almost here." He looked down. His own hands were wet, dripping onto the sheets. The air was thick with the smell of rain, even though the window had not been opened in days. He laughed once, a dry, broken sound, then looked back at the mirror. In the reflection, the words were gone. The wall there was clean and bright. The lamp burned steady. And his wife was waiting. She stood beside the dresser, head tilted slightly, her hands clasped before her. There was no fear in her face, no confusion, only an aching kind of certainty. The space between them shimmered like heat above asphalt. He could almost see the room beyond, its edges softer, warmer. The reflection seemed to breathe. He whispered her name. For the first time, her lips moved in perfect sync with his. And this time, he heard her. "Come home."
At that moment, something inside the hotel began to move. The walls shifted with a deep, wet groan, plaster cracking, wood splintering. A ripple passed through the floorboards, traveling outward like a wave. Dust fell in thin gray sheets from the ceiling. The mirror vibrated violently, then steadied again, its surface now black and gleaming like oil. Thomas stepped back, heart hammering. The hum was louder now, the same low tone that had haunted the hallways, only deeper, closer. He felt it through the soles of his feet, through his teeth, through the air itself. And then the lights went out. For a few seconds there was only darkness. Then a faint crimson glow began to seep from the mirror, bathing the room in color. It was the first color he had seen in weeks, and it was beautiful. He moved toward it slowly, as if drawn by gravity. The reflection showed the hotel transformed, restored, alive, bathed in red light that flickered like fire. The chandeliers gleamed, the floorboards shone. The air was alive with motion. Guests in elegant clothes drifted through the corridors, speaking without sound. The woman stood among them, her hand extended toward him, waiting. Behind her, the other Thomas stepped aside. The glass pulsed once, a soundless heartbeat. Then it began to thin, the surface becoming translucent, the two rooms merging like overlaid film. He could see his own shadow stretching into the reflection, long and wavering, until it touched hers. The hum deepened, the floor shook. Without hesitation, he reached forward. This time, the mirror did not resist. His fingers sank through, then his wrist, then his arm. It was warm and thick, like water at midnight. He took one last breath and stepped in. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, sound. The faint hiss of rain, the soft creak of a floorboard, the scent of camellias. Thomas opened his eyes. The light was warm, golden. The walls gleamed with varnish. The air was clean. The hotel was alive. He turned slowly. The dresser stood polished and whole. The vase of flowers on it was fresh and bright. Through the open window, he could hear the river flowing, calm, steady, no storm at all. And behind him, a voice spoke his name. He turned. She was there. She looked exactly as she had in the mirror. The same soft hair, the same pale dress, the same steady eyes filled with quiet understanding. She reached out and touched his face, her hand warm against his skin. He could feel her pulse, slow and certain, beneath her fingertips. "Eleanor," he whispered. She smiled. "You came back." He wanted to speak, to ask how, but the words died in his throat. The world around them shimmered with impossible stillness. Everything was perfect, and yet something in him knew it was wrong. Outside the window, the river moved too slowly. The clouds above it were motionless, painted against the sky. And when he turned toward the mirror, he saw the truth. The reflection now showed the ruined hotel, the real one. The walls blackened with mold, the floor sunken and warped. The lamp flickered in the dark. In that world there was no warmth, no color. And in the center of it, the real Thomas Vale sat motionless in the chair, eyes open, his skin gray beneath the lamplight. For a long time he stared at himself. Neither version moved. Then the reflection, the man in the ruined world, blinked once slowly, as though in farewell. And the glass went dark. Days passed, or perhaps no days at all. Time in that world did not behave the way it should. Thomas walked the halls of the restored hotel, hearing faint music drift from the lobby below. Guests appear and vanish like memories. A woman in pearls, a man with a newspaper dated decades before. Each nodded politely when they passed him, but none spoke. The world inside the mirror was quiet and perfect, but it was hollow, a preserved dream looping endlessly. At night he would stand by the window and watch the red shimmer along the river. Somewhere far below, in the depths of the water, faint lights glowed like eyes. Sometimes he thought he could hear voices rising from beneath,
murmuring names carried by the current. And sometimes, just for an instant, he would see flashes of the other world. The decaying hotel, the chair before the mirror, his own lifeless body slumped in the dark. He stopped looking after a while. Months later, or minutes, a stranger came to Baylock, a writer, looking for stories of the flood. Locals spoke of the old Meridian house, of its empty rooms, and the man who had vanished during the storm. The police had found nothing, no body, no trace. Only a chair before a shattered mirror and a faint scent of camellias. The writer rented a room on the second floor, unaware that it was room 217. He unpacked his things, set his typewriter on the desk, and opened the curtains. The air smelled faintly of dust and river water. As night fell, he noticed something strange about the mirror. Though the room behind him was dark, the reflection glowed faintly red, a soft, steady pulse, as if light were leaking through from somewhere deep within the glass. He stepped closer. The surface flickered. For a moment, he thought he saw someone standing there, a man and a woman, side by side, smiling faintly through the shimmer. Then the image vanished. Only the empty room stared back. Later, as the wind rose and rain began again, the writer left his lamp burning beside the mirror. He could not say why, only that the silence of the hotel felt too complete, as if the walls were listening. When he finally lay down, the last thing he saw was his own reflection, faint, blurred, and just behind him, something else moving in the glass. It looked like a hand, reaching out.
Thank you for listening. New day, new story. Come back tomorrow. We'll keep the light on just long enough for you to find the next one.